So today we are going to talk about spores. So we talked just a second about spores before, and spores are these tiny microscopic organisms that help plants reproduce. So these would be the non-vascular plants, okay? So we've talked about the vascular system, how it transports water and nutrients from the soil through its roots, up through its stem, all the way up to the flower. Well, non-vascular plants have spores to help them reproduce, to help them make more plants, and they absorb the water. So if you look at this picture, and today we're on pages 68 and 69 in our science book. If you look at this picture, you will see a bunch of non-vascular plants, which this one is moss and ferns. So have you guys ever seen any moss or ferns anywhere? So if you've ever been to Abington or Bristol, Virginia, and you've driven the back roads there, you will see a bunch of trees and scenery that looks just like this because it's damp and it's cold in that area. It's growing on mountains just like that picture. And that's where they thrive. That's where they grow really well, is in the damp, cold areas, okay? So let's look and see what this picture says. Let me add that so I can move it. So it says millions of years ago, these velvety ferns and mosses were the Earth's most successful plants and a favorite food for many herbivore dinosaurs. So we have heard the term herbivore before. What does herbivore mean? Herbivores are the animals that eat plants. So many herbivore dinosaurs means that the dinosaurs that were eating mostly plants. So we're going to talk about spores, and like I said, spores are a microscopic one-celled organism from which some bacteria, fungi, and certain green plants reproduce. Spores are transported by wind and water or in the waste products of animals such as moose, reindeer that had eaten some moss or fern. So let's read about mosses and ferns. Walk into a damp, cool, shady place, and you might notice something green and fuzzy covering many of the rocks. It grows very low to the ground and looks a bit like green carpet. What is it? Meet moss, a kind of plant that is very different from the leafy, flowery plants you have just learned about. What makes moss so different? So have you ever seen any moss anywhere? So a lot of the times, like it said, it'll grow in damp, cool places that are shady. Sometimes you'll see them growing near trees because trees absorb water through their roots. So mosses don't have seeds or flowers. Instead, they have spores. Unlike a seed, which is made by pollination, a spore has everything it needs to reproduce itself. All by itself, a spore can grow into a completely new plant. Mosses are not the only plant that reproduce by spores. So ferns have lots of feathery leaves called fronds. Unlike the short mosses, ferns have no seeds or flowers. They also reproduce by releasing spores that are then carried away by the wind to other areas. So I'm sure that you guys have maybe seen some ferns before. A lot of people put ferns in hanging baskets and hang it on their porch. Sometimes if you're walking through the forest and you see these like feathery leaves, those are ferns. Okay, so what is the major difference between a flowering plant and a moss or fern? What is one big difference between the two? Flowering plants need seeds to reproduce and pollen, and mosses and ferns need spores to reproduce. So that's one major difference between the two. In what ways are spores and seeds similar? How are they similar to each other? They're similar to each other because they help plants reproduce. Okay, so let's look up here at the mighty mosses. So it's got the definition of moss right here, which are small furry plants that grow in clumps in damp, shady locations. They don't have flowers and they don't have seeds. They may be small, usually never taller than an inch or two, but mosses are a vital part of our ecosystem. There are about 24,000 different kinds of mosses, and they can be found growing on rocks, in tree trunks, as well as in the soil. Mosses have been around for about 280 million years ago, much longer than ferns. So I'm sure that if you go on a nature walk or you go walking in the woods, you will probably see this velvety plant, and that's moss. So let's read about the feathery ferns. Ferns love the damp and shaded areas of forests, ravines, and gorges. That is where you will most likely find these ancient plants. Early in the spring, a single stalk that looks a bit like a violin neck will emerge. Slowly it will uncurl and the fronds will spread. 200 million years ago, much of the earth was covered with fern forests, and ferns were the most abundant plant on the planet. Plant-eating dinosaurs, or herbivores, thrived on a diet of ferns. Today, there are still about 12,000 different kinds of ferns. So if we scroll down a little bit, you can see a picture of a fern. So this is a fern. I'm sure that some of your parents or grandparents may have ferns in the summertime or the spring. So these are the fern spores. They are the underside of the fern found, or frond holds clumps of spores. So you can see all of these fronds and all the spores there. So if we go back up to this picture of a dinosaur, it has a caption with Fern's favorites. So those are dinosaurs that would eat ferns. So over here we've got our definition of ferns: plants with feather-like fronds, no flowers or seeds. Like mosses, ferns reproduce with spores. So let's read about this link to the past, okay? Today, many parts of Virginia have rich, cool deposits, but millions of years ago, those areas were covered with vast fern forest. The key word for this video is liverwort. So we've talked about liverworts before. Those are also non-vascular plants. So in our Google form, when it says what is the keyword, the keyword is liverworts. So those areas were covered with vast ferns or forests. So as ferns died and decayed, the layers were compressed over time. Intense pressure led to buildup of heat, and the result was a hardened lump coal. Today, it is not uncommon to find fossilized imprints of ancient ferns in a hunk of coal. Can you spot this fossilized ferns print in this lump of coal? So in this lump of coal, let me zoom in so you guys can see it much better. Can you find any imprints of ferns? Let's zoom in all the way. You definitely can. So if you look really closely, you can see here's some ferns, and there is. So that is really neat. And I think even if you go in the Pocahontas exhibition mind, you guys could find the fossilized imprints of ferns in there, I believe. I could be wrong. But I think that they have some imprints. I know that they have one of a fish, and I think they do of a fern. But you can see here how the decaying plants, if you heat it up, then it turns into coal eventually. So that's really neat, especially around here in this area where coal is abundant, or where we have coal. So today we are going to complete the Google form for spores. And then after that, you guys are finished with science. Go back through, make sure that you've finished all of the week's work so that you can relax on the weekend. And I will talk to you guys on Monday.